In an article posted in the Financial Post, our next guest warns that history may be echoing in unsettling ways. Drawing on the concept of Anschluss, the term used to describe Nazi Germany's annexation of Austria in 1938. The piece argues that territorial ambition and the misuse of national security rhetoric are once again shaping global politics. The article suggests that as traditional alliances weaken and economic pressure replaces military force, countries like Canada could find themselves increasingly vulnerable to coercion and influence from larger powers. It raises pointed questions about sovereignty, economic resilience, and whether Canada is prepared for a world where power politics are once again on the rise. Joining us now to discuss those concerns and what they could mean for Canada is the author of the article, Thomas Caldwell, chair of Caldwell Securities Limited. Thomas, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you, Theresa.
Now, you open your piece by reframing Anschluss as logical because of shared language and culture, then pivot to borders as artificial. How do you see this perspective relating to Canada's relationship with the U.S. border?
Well, my comment about artificial wasn't original. It was a quote from President Trump. He sees the border as artificial. He views North America as one entity, with his being in charge. And so that's his agenda. He's about real estate. And remember, all wars and near wars are always about real estate. Ideology can be used, God gets enlisted, but it's still territory. And that's how he thinks.
And how do you think Canadians react to Donald Trump making comments that these borders are artificial?
I think our reaction, we had a sort of a lame kind of like elbows up, like we're playing a game of hockey. This ain't hockey. This is a totally different game. And it may, hearken to Gordie Howe and being tough in the corners, but that's not what we're talking about here. This is a totally different matter. When you talk about America attempting or wanting to absorb Canada, it sounds extreme, but we live in a world now where we are discussing things that we would never have talked about a year ago or 2 years ago. And he's opened this Pandora's box. He's talked about the 51st state. And remember, the card he's using is national security, which is actually a Stalinist phrase invented by a fellow by the name of Felix Dzerzhinsky, who headed the secret police under Stalin. If you were a threat to national security, what is a threat to national security? But if you were, you could be hauled off, interrogated, tortured, and killed. That was it. Now, the new phrase is narco-terrorism. Oh my God, a narco-terrorist is nothing worse than that. So what he's talking about now is first up on this buffet is Greenland. And it's unconscionable what he's after. He's America used to have 30 bases in Greenland. Now they have one. And the Danes have said, listen, if you want 30 bases, you can have whatever you want there. But he's talking about annexation. He's not talking about national security. He's talking about resources. Oh, and he said, oh, we got to stop the Chinese and the Russians from surrounding Greenland. That's absolute. So what he's after there is territory. When he's finished with Greenland, and my sense is he's going to keep driving at that, he's going to end up with two sides of the equation. He's going to control the Arctic from the Alaska side and the Greenland side. And then the next theory is going to be, well, we're kind of soft in the middle with Canada. Canada can't do this. We have to take over the Arctic for national security's reason. And remember, he wants to have this gold dome. And the gold dome that is missile defense has to include Canada, otherwise it doesn't work. So he will just say Canada can't do this, it's not participating. So this national security hoax, if you will, because we're not going to war with Russia, we're not going to war with China. Everybody's going to push, but nobody wants a big war. It's not going to happen. But he's using that to penetrate into Canada. And I think he's not going to go to war. We're not going to have a war with the Americans, but he will try to make our lives economically miserable. And we have made ourselves vulnerable to that, by the way, with 10 years of idiotic, childish government out of Ottawa and the Liberal Party foisting that buffoon on the country. And now we're paying the price of that because we don't have a sense of pride. We've been robbed of our history. The only history they teach is how bad we were to the Indigenous, which is nonsense. So my point here is, it's the right time for him to be pushing, for Trump to be pushing in this direction, because we've also made ourselves vulnerable to this type of thing.
And I want to talk about the economic tools that you suggest in this piece. So tariffs, embargoes, trade pressure. Are they more likely to? They are more likely to be used than tanks to push Canada towards any kind of Anschluss with the United States.
Of
What
course,
specific scenario? What
they're
specific
not going to
scenarios?
use tanks. They're not going to use tanks. This is not going to be military.
Right.
that's not the,
Sorry, but what specific scenarios or early warning signs should Canadians actually be watching for?
we've already got them. The tariffs on steel, the tariffs on Ottawa. This is designed to destroy on automobiles, steel, aluminum. We've already got the warning signs. He's trying to destroy key industries. And remember, Prime Minister Carney's been in China, and we have to find other buyers for our products, including our heavy oil. Because remember, Venezuela's heavy oil that can feed those refineries on the Gulf. So the next thing is Canada's doing a lot of business with China. They're exporting oil there. And this is how we're going to get, we're falling into the trap and we're going to be painted as the enemy dealing with China. But frankly, our natural enemy is now, and generally always has been, America. China's not our natural enemy. Yeah, ideology, these guys play hardball in China, make no mistake. But our getting closer to China as the rest of the world, they're trying to diversify our trade, will be seen as painted as a threat to American national security. Therefore, they have to take a more activist role. But it's not going to be militarily. They will try to make our lives as miserable economically as he can, so that being part of America becomes attractive.
And you argue that Canada is particularly vulnerable because of internal divisions, regional interests, and a loss of pride to its own history. In practical terms, what would Canadians need to do differently, politically, economically, or culturally, to make the country less annexation prone?
I don't know that there's a lot we can do now, but I think the starting point is remember we're Canadians. We have a proud and incredibly positive history, and we got to stop debasing it with this political rhetoric around Indigenous and all this other things. Oh, we've been terrible, terrible. No, we haven't. We built a country out of the wilderness. This was the safe haven for people all over the world, and including America. If you were a slave and you escaped in the United States, you were not free until you got to Canada. It has been the steam valve when other countries go whippy on us. So we've had a very proud, and we've stood up and fought against evil in the First and the Second World Wars. We were always stand up guys voluntarily. We didn't have conscription, volunteered. Now the word's conscription later in the war, but we got to rebuild our history. We got to get confidence in our industries. And I think Prime Minister Carney is doing the best he can to try to diversify our customer base. So he's doing what he can. So we'll just see how it evolves in the next little while. And maybe President Trump will overpay his hand in Greenland and cause him to pause for a minute. And we do have midterm elections, and that might cause him to pause as well. Who knows? We'll see.
Now, near the end, you invoke Franklin and Jefferson and portray Trump as resurrecting a centuries old version of United North America by any means necessary. If that is the long game, what choices do Canadian leaders need to make to avoid that?
To grow up and understand the fact that we're in competition, just as companies are, countries are. We got to make Canadians proud. We got to do things, cut away the stumbling blocks, red tape, and taxes that make this a less desirable country to be in. So we have to run a good government. We're in competition. And if we're doing a good job, people aren't even going to listen to annexation talk.
Well, Thomas, thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Teresa.